All right, now I'm not muted anymore. I am live. This is Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. It is Tuesday. Welcome to the program. Hope you'll join me. Give me a call, 240-242-5646. A lot of drama in the Halitics Facebook, on the Halitics Facebook group, or in the group, I guess, on the page in the group. It's a group, not a page. So in the group, call in if you have any thoughts on it. If you're part of that, would love to talk to you about it. I've had to take steps against one of the posters there, and they're kind of salty about it. And I'd certainly welcome their joining me on Halitics. I just have a rule against attacking others in the group. It's not against attacking other politicians. It's not against going after media figures. I've allowed a lot of criticism of me that I wouldn't permit if it was with respect to other individuals. But if you're going to be on the Halitics or in the Halitics group and sharing your views, you just don't get to attack personally. You don't get to make personal insults against others in that group. It's just that simple. Or even other people, individuals. Ideas are always fair game. You can go after public figures, but just not people in Halitics. I just won't allow it. I don't know why this is it seems like it's tougher on people. I don't really get that. So talking about going after people, let's start with the Bernie thing. So I really have such mixed feelings. Bernie took a lot of heat at the Workers Strike Back conference over the weekend, and I thought it mostly was all fair. And this was one of the comments, one of the jokes, kind of put this together in response to a comment by somebody at the group. Yeah, have you heard about the new Bernie action figure? It's sold out, get it? Because Bernie's a sellout. And I think there's a lot of fairness to that. It's true. Bernie has simply not fought the Democratic oligarchs the way we want him to, the way people who supported his campaign were so eager for him to do, especially in 2016 when he went down to defeat. And unlike other leftists, now I bow to know, I actually probably not as far to the left as some of the people who were at that group at the conference, because again, I'm not like reflexively attack against capitalism per se. There was a lot of talk about how we have to completely dismantle the capitalist system altogether. As I define capitalism, I don't try to use my own definition. As I understand the definition of capitalism, it is a system where investors can aggregate their capital and then purchase assets that they use, or they can build a company that they can, within that limited liability company, produce goods, services, and sell them, right? And to make a profit. So that's capitalism. And I don't necessarily believe that entire system needs to be dismantled. I think currently the way we live today in such an interconnected, complex civilization where we're so connected to everyone around the globe, I don't know that we could dismantle capitalism without, in fact, I believe we could not dismantle capitalism without wreaking enormous pain and suffering, because the distribution of the necessities of life, specifically food, but also fuel and shelter, does depend on a capitalist system right now. Now, I think we should, without question, aggressively rein in capitalists and punish bad behavior that that they engage in, that is in fact destroying our planet. And if we could go back, 10,000 years and stop. We need a market economy. I mean, I don't know how you don't have a market economy. I guess if you can live in small hunter-gatherer groups, you can somehow avoid that, where people within a small group go out and they together gather food, or they kill an animal and then they share it. So that would not clearly wouldn't be capitalism. But once you get into a market type economy where there's real division of labor, it becomes more and more difficult. So I don't know that we could dismantle capitalism, and I don't know what we could replace it with. The market does provide really important mechanisms that lead to the production of certain goods and certain foods and the like that people want. So I don't know how you dismantle. Now you could say, well, we just don't aggregate capital. We let people invest their own money, but they don't get to pool with others. But I don't know that that's what. So that's feudalism. That's having a monarchy. Is that really better? You could say, well, we're going to distribute all wealth equally. Then where do you go with that? Then, okay, we all have the same amount today. What happens tomorrow? Who's going to decide how much of one particular product we produce? How much steel does society need? You need mechanisms that incentivize the production of certain goods and the distribution of certain services. You need that. And I don't know that anything is better than, the profit system to do that. But it causes tremendous dislocation, harm. It's destroying our planet in short order. There's no question about that. So how do you address it? And I always say over and over, I think the way you address it is you guarantee that all have enough and no one has too much. You reduce the benefits that come from bad behavior. Drastically reduce them. And at the same time, you still punish it. So if people abuse their workers, they treat them badly, or they collude, they'll pay a very high price. At the same time, because we're going to tax you at a very, very high level once your income is above a certain amount, or once you die and you have you've accumulated very vast resources. If you have, we're going to tax that at a virtually confiscatory rate above a certain amount. Well, your benefits are limited, right? You do a bad thing, you may profit in the short run, but you're going to have to pay taxes. You're going to have to pay. Now, you could say, well, you don't have to pay taxes because you could lie and cheat and steal the system. But you look at someone like an Al Capone, people knew he had all that money. You could see it. You could see Scarface is sitting there in his limos and he's, living at large and with fat cigars. Because, oh, this guy's got a lot of money. What kind of taxes is he paying? So that's how they got him on tax avoidance. Clearly, that's better than what we have now. Is it perfect? Probably not, but no system is perfect. So yes, 90 plus top marginal tax rates on estates and income would get us to a much, much better place. And we would also then be closer in terms of wanting, environmental laws that protect our environment, because the rich wouldn't be able to they wouldn't have that much money. They wouldn't be able to avoid the consequences of a dying planet to the degree that they can today. And people like Musk and whatever can say, oh, well, we'll go inhabit Mars. Well, once we've completely burned out this planet, we'll go inhabit Mars. Both parties are the problem. So is Bernie a sellout? This was the joke. Bernie sold out, right? Bernie went to the DNC and he spoke this powerful, impassioned plea for people to vote for Kamala Harris, a neo-lib of the first water, a neocon, a warmonger. How could you possibly support her, Bernie? You've betrayed your movement. And I agree with that. It's true. But people are complicated. Bernie's doing some good things too. So it's tough. It's really, really tough. What do we do? Now we have to build an alternative. We have to challenge the Democratic Party from the left. But does that mean that we reject anybody at all costs, at all points, who's tied to the Democratic Party in any way? And obviously Bernie is very closely tied to the Democratic Party. He calls himself an independent. I mean, he's not AOC, who's actually, a Democratic representative. He's not as bad as she is. But he's a Democratic aligned senator without any doubt about it. He's run in 2 Democratic presidential primaries, lost them both. And, as I say, I'm not as far to the left. I am very far to the left, but in some ways I break with left-wing orthodoxy. I don't just say, oh, it's Barack Obama's fault that Bernie Sanders didn't get elected. Oh, it's CNN, it's Donna Brazil's fault that Bernie didn't get elected because she sent questions to Hillary Clinton before debate. Look, anybody paying attention knew in 2016 how much better Bernie was than Hillary. Nobody has a legitimate defense. Well, I was suckered and fooled by Gloria Steinem when she said, oh, we have to support women, or when Madeline Halfbright said there's a special place in hell for women who don't support women. And then Cory Booker is, applauding her. Anyone who fell for that, you have no excuse. There's no legitimate argument there. Of course, Bernie was better for women, much, much, much better for women than Hillary. So I'm not going to say, oh, it was because the Democratic establishment lined up against him. Voters should have recognized that was the crock that was. And if you say, well, I thought that Bernie would lose to Trump and Hillary could beat Trump, well, you had no reason to believe that. The evidence was clear that Bernie was stronger against Trump. Bernie would have beaten Trump. So voters have to take ownership. You don't get to just point fingers and say, I have no agency. Whatever I do is going to get, defeated by the corporate elites. It's just a load of crap. It's just an excuse. It's a very weak excuse, too. When you have a good choice, and you did. We did. And we had an okay choice in 2020. Bernie 2020, not Bernie 2016, but decent. And then in 2024, we had Jill Stein, clearly the best option. So there's no excuse for you not voting for these good people. But just because Bernie, ran some good campaigns and did some good things, that doesn't excuse now him caping for Kamala and justifying the Democratic inaction and voting against Tulsi, who was a really good choice for DNI, and arguing against the peace proposals and the push for an end to the Russia war by Trump, which is good, that he's right to do that. Hegseth is right to do that. Bernie is totally wrong to be against that. And he's only doing it, I'm sure, I don't know why. I can't speak. I'm not in his mind. Maybe he really does. He's never been great on peace issues. He really hasn't. That's not been his strong suit. His strong suit has been domestic policy, but he's been better than most. And he called out the Israeli aggression. Doesn't call it a Holocaust, doesn't call it genocide as far as I know. Maybe he does. I know AOC once did, which he was basically forced into it. But Bernie, again, better than most. But, he's also been less good than he should be. Far, far, far less good. So what do we do with that? By the way, join Halitics on Facebook. It's not hard to do. There's no charge. No charge for anything I do. No charge whatsoever. 240-242-5646 if you want to join me. Let me see if I can we're going to have tomorrow Chuck Pinocchio on. One thing I am working on, although I haven't worked as hard on it as I will work on it, is some kind of Medicare for all, some kind of healthcare for all local proposal. So maybe for seeing if there's any way to get it on a county-wide level, which would be really, really impressive if we could somehow get that done. It would be great. So that's something I'm going to talk to Chuck about tomorrow. We're going to have probably Carlos on Friday. I'm going to record Thursday. Carlos can't come on during the week, day. So I'll record with him at night, and we'll get Carlos on. One thing I really like about Carlos as a guest is he is the one who's closest to me in terms of views. And I've got a couple of folks lined up probably for next week or the following week who I met at the Worker Strike Back conference. So we'll talk to them. There we had disagreement. One of them I disagreed vehemently with on tariffs, and we'll get into it with him on the tariff issue. So the question about Bernie, though, is does the fact that Bernie has disappointed us, does the fact that Bernie aligns with the Democratic Party on many issues and caucuses with the Democrats, does that mean we throw him out completely? Or should we recognize there's good there, but not good enough? And so that's kind of what I want to talk about. And that's the question, right? The question we put to you, which I'd love to have you respond if you can. If you want to call in, I'd love to have you call in. How do you view Bernie at this point? I mean, is he, like I said, is he a savior? Is he a sellout? Or is he something else? And you know, there's an expression, right? He's something else, right? So is Bernie, could you call him, is he like, that's a really good thing, right? Like, man, that's something else. We don't use that expression anymore. That's sort of more like, I guess, even from the 60s, maybe when I was a kid in the 70s growing out, man, that's something else. I remember that quite a bit. So which is Bernie, savior, sellout, or something else? And I wouldn't say necessarily something else necessarily positive, because, you know, savior is like great. Is he like Jesus? Is he going to save us from this evil, corrupt system we live in today? Is he a sellout? Is he just completely, you know, given up, is no longer fighting for us, fighting for the principles that animated him as a younger man? Or again, is he something else? And it's kind of like the Trump thing, right? Like, is he a fascist? Is he a Nazi? Is he this? Is he that? And some people saying Nazi. I don't think Trump's a Nazi, but he's arguably a fascist. I kind of argued against it, but there's an argument both ways. I don't think Bernie's a savior. I think he might have been our savior in 2016. I think we blew it as Democratic primary voters. Clearly, we blew it. He's sold out, yes, to a degree. But that's not all he is. He's more than that. He's a little more complicated to figure. I think AOC pretty much falls into the sellout category. Bernie, not so much. So this post on my Facebook, well, it wasn't on my page. It was on a Facebook friends page, who is actually a friend, somebody I know personally and I've worked with. And we've had our differences. We've also had our agreements. Kind of got me to think about discussing Bernie today, especially given the fact that Bernie was a big part of the conference. Like, he was loomed large. So much unhappiness, so much restiveness in the working class communities and among young people especially, and a feeling that Bernie could have been, you know, he could have been a contender. He could have been a champ even, and he wasn't, right? So then is he just a bum, in the words of Marlon Brando, and I forget the character he plays, the Terry whatever, the boxer, and now no one even probably remembers On the Waterfront except for me. All right, Bernie Sanders. So this is like a positive, right? This was posted in on a friend's Facebook page. Bernie, and I never out people who are my friends on Facebook unless it's obvious who they are, and then I might. So Bernie Sanders, by the way, just if you heard the ring, yes, call in 240-242-5646. It's Halitics. And don't forget, please click like, click subscribe. I haven't put my subscribe yet. Maybe I did once. Let's do another subscribe now real quick before we get to the discussion here about Bernie on there from our friends in. Hey, why isn't my subscribe now button showing? It should be. From our friends there in Common Dreams, which is decent, although I think there's a legitimate concern that all of these so-called left organs like Common Dreams, and especially The Nation, of course, but also Jacobin, have kind of gone over to the resistance movement. In other words, their views are basically informed by, we have to stop Trump. We have to get after Trump. Trump is the enemy, not the Democratic Party, not the duopoly, but Trump, just Trump. Let's get Trump. And I think that's a fair criticism. That is where we are to a large degree. The so-called resistance media has become co-opted by the Trump resistance. Why this is a problem? I get it. We have to resist a lot of what Trump does. But we shouldn't be knee-jerk resistance. There are some things that Trump's doing that progressives should welcome, and some of us do, like peace with Russia. That is something we should like cutting. He says he wants to cut the military budget. That should be embraced. Like reining in the security state, the surveillance state, which is what Tulsi is known for fighting for. So I'm not saying any of that will happen, but at least you can use what Trump has said as kind of an argument for him to say, hey, listen, do this. If you do this, we'll be happy. We'll be there for you. And we're just not seeing that from the Democrats. We're not seeing that from progressive organs. No willingness to recognize certain positive actions by Trump. And why is that so bad? Because you're flacking then for the Democratic Party. You're saying, okay, we just want one or the other. We don't want this one. We'll take anything the Democrats give us. That's not progressive politics. Progressive politics is this a good policy? Is this a good plan? Is this a good proposal? Do we support it or don't we? How do we get this? So peace with Russia is good. It's a positive. Now, not peace at any price, clearly. But peace with Russia is better than a completely wiped out Ukraine. That's a wasteland, the way so much of eastern Ukraine is now. That's not good. Surrendering to Russia, that's not good either. No one's talking about surrendering to Russia. That's why the resistance is bad. Because if all you're going to do is resist Trump, then you're throwing out a baby with the bathwater. You're not recognizing that the reason Trump was elected is because there are real and accurate and completely correct concerns about democratic misrule, about democratic corruption, about democratic evil. From Facebook, Bernie Sanders is a one-man opposition party organizing thousands in vulnerable red districts in the Midwest against GOP House plans to gut Medicaid. And that is from Facebook. Well, it's a quote from Common Dreams. Now, I read that and I was like, come on, man, let's stop with the Bernie worship, the Bernie hero worship. So I posted in response, and I'll just show you what I did. And people were, pretty pro-Bernie, or this page, very pro-Bernie, right? People that, oh, Bernie's so great, if only we had Bernie. And, I'd been hearing a lot of anti-Bernie stuff, which I largely agreed with and which I thought was just. But one person wrote maddeningly Groundhog Day, meaning more Bernie fighting, the same fights over and over, which is accurate. And I wrote, still trying to sheepdog people into the morally and intellectually bankrupt Democratic Party rather than building a pro-worker, pro-peace, pro-environment, pro-life movement, which is, I believe, true. That is all true about Bernie. But you know what? It wasn't really a fair response to that post, because what Bernie's doing in the Midwest, I actually kind of like. It's a good thing. It's not enough. I get that there's reasons to be critical of it, but he's right. What he's doing is the right policy. So then I got a response. I'm not here to apologize for him or anyone, but in this case, in this moment, he is trying to peel off enough GOP votes to block passage of the House budget, which would expand existing cuts and target Medicare. Whatever you think of his strategic goals, this is a sound tactical approach that can yield an important immediate victory. And you know what? That's right. I was just wrong. In general, my criticism of Bernie, I stand by. But in this case, Bernie's right. What he's doing is right. And we'll get into it in more particulars. So this is something I have to be mindful of. And I think we all have to be. Let's not be too knee-jerk, too reflexive in our criticism or our responses. Now, even after I posted this, I was like, am I being too hard on it? I don't want to start fights on Facebook necessarily, but nothing I wrote is a personal attack. There's no personal insult on anyone except Bernie. I call him a sheepdog, but that's it. And Bernie's a public figure, and on that, I'm fine with that. So I recognized my error here, and I said, yes, this is a fair response to my more general criticism of Bernie, and I share your and Bernie's short-term goal, which is absolutely to stop cuts to Medicare and Medicaid. So the Republicans trying to cut Medicare, Medicaid. Now, Bernie's the only one who's doing this, right? And you know what? Apparently, according to Common Dreams, and I'm sure they're right, Chucky and Hakeem, and you'll see pictures of these two luminaries, these two Democratic Party stalwarts, they don't like what Bernie's doing. They're angry that progressives are pushing them to act like an opposition party. And why are they angry? Well, they want to cut Medicare. They're fine with cutting Medicare, Medicaid. They don't have a problem with that. They just don't. It's just not something they care. They'll always have good health care. They don't have to worry about that. They're in the pocket of the for-profit healthcare industry. And, maybe Medicare is a profit center now, becoming more and more. But look, Joe Biden was pushing to privatize it, going with the Medicare Disadvantage, pushing for that. So these two guys here, they're both New Yorkers. They're both representatives from Wall Street. They don't want any fights. They don't want to pick fights with Trump, except on the margins and on when it comes to identity politics. But that's it. That's it. I give Bernie credit for going to red districts, for somewhat purplish, reddish districts, and talking to the constituents of folks in those districts, the constituents in those districts of Republican Congress members, and saying, hey, this is going to hurt you. This is what these policies will make life worse for you. Don't support them. And Bernie's right. So he's doing exactly what he should be doing. There's criticism of him on the left for this, and I'll get into that in a minute. But, it's good. He's the one person who's actually fighting the, quote, oligarchy. Now, it's interesting. There's a lot of pushback against that. One of the, it was quite extraordinary. I saw this tweet. I don't have it here, but Jamel Hill wrote, this isn't a good strategy. The people in those districts, they don't even know what the word oligarchy means. So she's like a identity politics, a super aggressive identity politics type commentator, Jamel Hill. She used to work for ESPN before she got fired there. Why would you say that? What's your point? Why would you say that these Republican district residents don't understand the word oligarchy? This is so counterproductive. And I'll explain why. Because Democratic elites owe their power to fomenting intra-class rivalry, intra-class strife, pitting poor, struggling, and working people against each other. So we're going to mock those Nebraskans and say they don't even understand what oligarchy means. And this is really my problem with Bernie. That's the Democratic elite speaking. That's the voice of Democratic leadership. Why are you talking to those Republican voters? They don't even understand what an oligarchy is. Bernie knows what an oligarchy is. He knows that there's an oligarchy whether Democrats or Republicans are in power. He knows that the weapons manufacturers were calling the shots under the Biden administration. He knows that our war with Russia and our war on Gaza were driven by profits that, went right into the pockets of Lockheed Martin and Boeing. He understands that. And yet he only takes the fight when Republicans are in power against Republicans. He does acknowledge as, in this moment when there's no election, when there's no real cost to the Democrats, that he does acknowledge, yes, there's a problem with Republican and Democratic billionaires. But when it really matters, no. When he could have said to Kamala, yeah, you want me to give a speech for you at the Democratic convention, then I need you to say we're not going to no to fracking. I need you to come out and say yes to Medicare for all. After all, Bernie's been pushing for Medicare for all for 20 plus years. He had leverage before the DNC. He could have said, I'm not going to campaign for you if I don't get these specific concessions from you. He didn't do that. So I understand the frustration on the left very, very much with Bernie. But all that said, yeah, there's a positive if he can rally enough pressure, if he can put enough pressure on these Republican representatives not to cut, to vote against cuts to Medicare and Medicaid. That's would lead to better outcomes for working people. It's not enough. It's not close to enough. We need to defeat the two-party system, the duopoly. The Democrats don't support Medicare and Medicaid either. They'll vote against the Trump budget because, for purely partisan reasons, and the individual Democratic representatives don't think it's in their own political best interest to vote against, Medicare and Medicaid and to vote with Trump. But they don't really care. They'll vote to gut. In fact, there was proposals to cut Medicare and Medicaid under Biden, certainly under Obama to cut Social Security, by Obama to cut Social Security. So the idea that these Democrats are on our side is ridiculous. But Bernie's right. Nevertheless, in this particular fight, if he can peel off a few Republicans, that's a good thing. And I think we need to acknowledge that on the left. This is the system we have. And here, Bernie is doing good work. Not enough, not enough, especially when Democrats have power. He will simply not take on that party, but at least he's doing something. And he deserves credit for that. Something to make life a little bit less hard for many millions of Americans. Here is Sabby Sabs. I wanted to play this because I think the understandable frustration, the anger, the resentment of Democrats has led us to a point where we simply cannot acknowledge even even something that is a good thing by Democrats. Just as, and I always criticize this among Democratic rank and file, they cannot acknowledge anything good that Trump does. If Trump's doing it, it must be bad. Well, among many hardcore leftists, progressive leftists, if anyone is doing anything for the Democratic Party, or if it's a Democratic-aligned Congress member or senator, and they're doing it, it must be bad. So here's Sabby on Bernie.
Correct when she said the road through the Democratic Party as a progressive leads to a graveyard. There is no movement for you in there. Bernie knows this. In fact, if you think that he forgot, or if you forgot, I just want to remind you, every time Bernie Sanders said, we got this movement, we're going to fight back against the billionaires, and he sheep herded you right back into the Democratic Party and said, support the corporate.
All right, so there's her Sabby's point is, so he's going to Omaha now, he's going to Nebraska now. Just think all the times he sheepdogged you, sheep herded you into the Democratic Party. You have to support Democrats. And she's right. Those are all true. That's all true. But in this case, he's not even saying you have to support Democrats. He's saying to the Republican Congress members, just vote against Trump's really bad bill. That's what he's saying. And he does acknowledge just how bad the Democratic billionaires are to the party. The problem is he only does it now when there's no election, when he's not using his power to leverage real, meaningful change in the party. So yeah, maybe we can possibly save some Medicare and Medicaid payments and make life just a little bit less awful. But ultimately, Sabby's right too. The road to the Democratic Party road is a road to nowhere, is a road to ultimate impoverishment, capitulation, surrender to the billionaire class, just as the Republican road is. The only way out of this is a true, meaningful opposition to both parties. From the conference I was at over the weekend, this is similar in nature to what Sabby said, but I think Jill Stein amplifies it to a degree.
Disapproval. So this is, above all, do not let this emergency be hijacked, because that is what they are trying to do right now. That is what Bernie Sanders is doing. That is what AOC is doing. That's what all of them are doing, is saying, see, look how bad Trump is, put us back in power. But what exactly are they doing? What they're doing, I think, is best summarized by Hakeem Jeffries, if you saw the clip of him that went viral, asking, well, what is it we can do? I'm trying to figure out what we can do. It's their government. That is the problem. It's not their government, it's our government. And we need to throw all the bums out.
So I agree with that to a very significant, almost completely. I agree. Yes, we ultimately have to throw them all out. But in this moment, when there is a direct threat to a lifeline for many millions of seniors, Medicare, and a lifeline for many millions of working class and working poor Americans, Medicaid, then we have to try to preserve it to the degree we can. And there's no two sides to this. It's just we need to do what we can to prevent the Republicans from gutting these critically important programs. So Bernie's right here. Now, I get where Jill is coming from, and I get where Sabby. They're really angry at Bernie, and they should be angry. And they're really even angrier, I believe, at AOC, and they should be even angrier at her. But the resentment for Bernie in this moment is, how come you didn't join us? Why aren't you at the worker strike back convention? Why aren't you being a true, being truly an opponent of this corporate duopoly political system? And they're right. He should be. He's wrong not to. He has the gravitas. He is the one politician in America, maybe AOC, but to a much lesser degree, he is the one politician who could maintain his popularity, maintain his influence, maybe even increase it, by rejecting the Democratic Party, by saying, you know what? No, I will join in certain fights. I will be willing to coalition with them to pass certain legislation, but I'm not going to be affiliated with this party anymore. We need to build a true, viable alternative. Bernie could do that, and he hasn't done that, and he's wrong to do that. And by not doing that, he has empowered the billionaire class. And that's a terrible, terrible thing. It's just wrong. But in this moment, his effort to stop cuts to Medicare and Medicaid are good. And we can't pretend that they're not. We can't ignore that. 240-242-5646 if you want to join me. 240-242-5646. I have been critical of blue sky. So one of the big problems, one of the issues that many people on the left have and believe and attribute our failings, right? The reason, and especially Democrats, we hear this a lot, is that we don't have media. Look, they have Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan is not a conservative. Joe Rogan is not a Republican. Joe Rogan did support Trump over Kamala. Joe Rogan also supported Bernie over Biden. The idea that Joe Rogan is some sort of partisan is just absurd. And to claim that the media, the alternative, the new media, if you will, is some monolith, the way, for example, right-wing talk radio was until, maybe the early 2000s, which was purely right-wing, is ridiculous. It's just not the case. There's plenty of progressive media that's easily found, especially on YouTube. But that's just not true. But the response by some Democrats is corporatism. So you hear all the talk, well, we have to embrace an alternative to X. X has so much more intellectual ferment, so much more back and forth. It's so much more democratic than Blue Sky. And I pointed this out, but Blue Sky is, for us, right? It's our Twitter, meaning on the left. I don't know. For me, being on the left means you get to debate ideas. You get to disagree. It means you get to take on leaders of every stripe, whatever party they're part of. You take on the elites and the billionaire class. But I've noticed this. Whenever I go into my Blue Sky account, all I see are these multimillionaires, these elites commenting. I don't see anyone challenging democratic orthodoxy whatsoever. So the first tweet or first Blue Sky post, Stephen King, the author, well-known, very closely affiliated with the Democratic Party, Democratic causes. The first name, Blue Sky. I don't think King may be a billionaire. He has sold so many books. I want to look that up. Is he a billionaire or Stephen King? He may be. I mean, so many. I don't love Stephen King. I don't think he's a bad writer by any means. I don't think he's like a hack. I don't love Stephen King's books, but they're good. I think obviously he's clearly an extraordinarily talented writer. He's worth $500 million, not worth $1 billion. So yeah, he's lecturing us on Blue Sky. I don't think a $500 million really needs to be lecturing people on on how their lives would be better. I just, to me, it's, again, the Democratic top-down approach, and it's actually very, very counterproductive. 240-242-5646, 240-242-5646. I'm trying to find, by the way, that Jemele Hill quote where she says they don't know where oligarchy means, but here we go. This is, again, it just struck me, the condescension that Democratic elites have for working people is so palpable and so off-putting and so harmful. And that's the function of it. So that's why Jemele Hill posts this. Not trying to be funny, but this isn't a good title for the tour, Fighting Oligarchy. A lot of the people you're trying to reach don't know what oligarchy means. The problem that Jemele Hill has with the term oligarchy is that working people understand far too well that the oligarchy is the Republican and Democratic elites. That's the problem. Jemele Hill wants a fight against populism. She wants a fight against working class uprising. She doesn't have any problem with Democratic elites in charge. So that's her issue. And when you post this crap, you make it so much harder to rally people together in support of non-elites, right? Together to have a group of disparate, racially diverse, ethnically diverse working people to come together. Because you have this ostensible quote, progressive, unquote, Jamel Hill, mocking them and saying, you don't even know what an oligarchy is. This is the problem that, with the entire Democratic Party movement, is the contempt they have for working people and why we must. And that contempt isn't just intellectual contempt. It's that we don't think they deserve a decent life. We don't think they deserve everyone, Medicare for all, right? They're against it. We don't think they deserve peace. You should have endless war with Russia as far as they're concerned. So we saw what's being posted on Blue Sky, the so-called Democratic media alternative, the social media for Democrats. Richard Branson. First, these are just, I went from, top 3 on my page, top 3. Richard Branson here pushing for endless war with Russia. This is a airplane guy, right? Virgin Atlantic, Virgin Airways. That's how he got rich. So yeah, I guess the aerospace industry loves the war. But it's devastating for working people who are opposed to it. So your top 2, they're half a millionaire, a cent a millionaire, mocking and attacking Trump for pushing for, he calls him the cent millionaire, right? I guess he's a demi-billionaire. He has half a billion. A cent, what is it? I don't know. 500 isn't cent. Is it? I don't know. Demi-billionaire, half a billionaire, I guess is what I'll have to call Stephen King, 500 millionaire. So he has this zero, just like calling Trump a Nazi, the swastika, Tesla, or Musk, the swastika, goes from 0 to 1939 in 3 seconds. So ha, ha, ha. Very funny. There's no policy, right? This is what we need to do differently. This is how we can make your life better. This is how both parties are oppressing you. There's none of that. Number 2, Richard Branson going after any push for peace with Russia. Disgusting. Despicable. Just an outright warmonger. That's your Blue Sky. And then number 3, I have no problem with this post. I wanted to give you the top 3, but it is interesting whose post it is. So this isn't, I talked about Jamel Hill. This is Jamel Bowie. He is a New York Times columnist who every single one of his columns is an identity politics screed against Trump and the Republicans and how they are all racist and they all hate black people and their policies are all designed to hold black people down. And then he posts, to be fair, I'm good with this one. I do like Roberta Flack. Killing Me Softly is a great song. She wrote it. She sang it. She did an incredible job with it. I'm sorry she died. Rest in peace, Roberta. So fine. Okay. But the poster himself is so closely affiliated with and associated with hyper-partisan democratic politics, identity politics that are causing much, much problems, that again, we see Blue Sky is just propaganda. It's bottom line. And this is not anybody famous, but I noticed this yesterday. Also on Blue Sky, I don't know who posted this came from, but maybe this was Mark Cuban's post. This was Mark Cuban. So again, another billionaire, and he reposts a Rachel Cohen. I don't know who Rachel Cohen is, but again, this came from the Mark Cuban, the billionaire Mark Cuban, and he is simply going after Musk and Trump. This is a video of Trump kissing Elon Musk's feet, playing in the Housing and Urban Development cafeteria. So the point I'm making isn't that some of these aren't legitimate posts, that it's purely top down. None of this comes from working people. None of this comes from anyone who's associated with pro-labor, pro-worker movement. They're just hyper-partisan attacks on Trump. That's why we are where we are. That's why we're seeing a Republican takeover, because Democrats are incapable of, unwilling to, refuse point blank to promote a pro-worker, pro-environment, pro-peace, pro-life agenda. They're against that. we need to go in a different direction. This is such a good example of this. Here's a reporter, and this was posted on Halitics as an example of how bad Trump is, because he's trying to, and Hegseth, because they're calling for peace in Ukraine. And all it does is prove just the opposite. So, what concessions will be demanded of Putin? So this is so, like that question, it's so incredibly tendentious. This is a question of Pete Hegseth, the new National Defense Secretary. And by the way, I have to say, I'm so much more comfortable with him as Defense Secretary than Lloyd Austin, who was a former Halliburton, I believe it was Halliburton, was it Raytheon? Raytheon board of director, right? He was a director of Raytheon. So at least Hegseth isn't that, right? He isn't just a weapons manufacturing representative in government with tremendous power. So what concessions will be demanded of Putin? I don't understand your point. What concessions? There's a war. We're trying to negotiate a settlement, an end to it. Putin's army, Russian armies occupy a large section of Ukraine. They are advancing slowly but steadily with extraordinary amount of carnage and bloodshed. This isn't about, well, you give me this. Hey, let's come together and build an empire, and you'll give this and I'll give that, and together we'll have more for ourselves. It's not like that. It's how do we stop the killing? How do we stop the war? So the idea that you're supposed to demand concessions before you even have a conversation is absurd. A bad thing is happening. How do we stop it? Also, the reporter's assumption is that we are in a position to demand concessions of Putin. We're not. We're not in any position to demand concessions. We're saying to Putin, how do we get to yes? Not you give us that. But the concession is the war ends. You take your troops and you go home. We take our troops and we both stop killing each other. That's the concession. How do people not get this? Every peace talk so far has been about what Ukraine has to give up. Territory, NATO aspirations, sovereignty. So what exactly is Putin putting on the table? Okay, this is such a horrible question because Ukraine has already lost territory. It's not giving it up. They're not taking Kiev, which is still in Ukrainian hands. The point is to prevent Kiev from becoming Russian. So the concession from Putin is we're not going to keep going towards Kiev anymore. We're not going to totally destroy Ukraine anymore. That's the concession. And no one's saying that Kiev has to give up sovereignty. No one's saying that there isn't going to be an independent Ukraine. That is not the point of the discussion. Yes, they do have to give up NATO aspirations. NATO is a military pact. It's a group, it's an organization of mutual defense, but also mutual offense. So yes, we are saying that this country that was carved out of Greater Russia, out of the Soviet Union, this country that was carved out of the Soviet Union, but that was part of Russia for centuries before, we're saying that this country, which is right on the border of Russia, isn't going to be part of NATO. That's what we're saying. Yeah. That it's not a concession because it isn't part of NATO now, but we're not, that is true. So yeah, got it. No one's talking about sovereignty. And the territory isn't being given up by Ukraine. It's already been lost. And so Hegseth is like, come on, stop it. This is time for diplomacy. And the reporter, who clearly is part of the propaganda outfit, the propaganda outlet of the military-industrial complex, doesn't want to have any part of it and fights back tooth and nail, trying desperately to discredit peace altogether, and says you're surrendering. Says, oh no, if only Ukraine is making concessions, that's surrender. Or only one side is making sacrifices is not peace, it's surrender. Oh no. Peace is when you're not killing each other on the battlefield. There's a war right now, a war that's utterly laying waste to Ukraine, that's been incredibly harmful, destructive. Young people, middle-aged people, old people, women, children, men are all being killed. The goal is to end that. What is hard to understand about that? And why do so many Democrats refuse to accept this? So this is not surrender. Surrender, and I look it up because we look up the term. What does surrender mean? Surrender is when you stop all resistance, but it's not just that you cease resistance. It's when you actually submit to the authority of your opponent. So a good example of surrender, obviously, was World War II. The French surrendered to the Germans. And at the end of the war, the Germans surrendered to the Allies. So when the French surrendered to the Germans, to the Nazis, Paris was no longer French, under French control. The German army, the German military made all decisions about how Paris would be governed. Every aspect of Parisian life was under the authority of the Germans. Similarly, when the Nazis surrendered to the Allies, the Russians, the US, the English, the British, and the French, although God knows why they were given, authority over Germany. And the German authorities there were no longer German authorities, period. That's not what anyone's talking about here. No one's saying there's not going to be a Ukraine. No one's saying that Russia controls and has authority over Ukraine. So it's not surrender. So it's just a false claim. It's just BS. It's just not true. And that kind of stuff is very problematic. You end discussion when people post things like, oh, you're surrendering if you give in to Russia, because then you can't have a conversation. You can't say no. You can't say, wait, what's in the best interest of the Ukrainian people? What's in the best interest of the United States? What's in the best interest of Russia? You can't say that because you've just been called a surrenderer. That's what the Democratic mouthpieces, the Democratic organs, the Democratic corporate media wants you to believe about Trump's plan. His proposal is, in fact, just negotiations with Russia. All right, one more piece I just want to share because this got got some pushback, shall we say, on the Halitics on Facebook. And I just wanted to respond to why I don't have a problem with this particular. I have a little bit of a problem with this post, but not much. And I watched the video, by the way, that was associated with it. The pictures of Joy Reid, it makes her look pretty bad there. It's true. But there's no attack on anybody who's part of Halitics. There's no personal insult. There's no, and I'm seeing there's art there, so, art. There's no dismissiveness, condescension whatsoever towards anyone on Halitics. Joy Reid did lose her job. Good riddance. I couldn't care less. I don't watch MSNBC. Her replacement, Simone Sanders, I think is just one of them. There's like 3 replacements. I don't know who the other 2 are. she's terrible too. Simone Sanders is awful too. Probably worse. Joy Reid made a point which I actually appreciated. As much as I dislike Joy Reid, as much as she's been a shill and a flack for the Democrats, she did speak out on occasion against the slaughter of Palestinians by the Harris-Biden administration. She was somewhat anti-war. So it is unfortunate to that degree that she's being replaced. And I think that's part of it. I think she's right. I think that as much as she towed the MSNBC corporate line, there were a few moments when she crossed it. And I think she's paying the price for that. But apparently her ratings were also awful. So fine, post this. There's no issue. You're not insulting anyone that's, part of Halitics. Joy Reid was, I think, making over $1 million a year, something like that. I shed no tears for her. Why should I? She can go do her podcast right now if she wants. She'll get an audience that's probably 100 times bigger than mine, at a minimum. So I'm not going to have the slightest bit of concern about her, and I don't know why anyone would complain about that post. If you want to complain about posts that insult individuals or that divide us within class. In other words, that pit poor, struggling, and working people against each other. That's not what Art's post does. There's nothing wrong with it. I will be back tomorrow. We'll have Chuck. We'll have Chuck on. We'll talk about, hopefully, the possibility of some kind of local or county-wide healthcare plans that cover everyone.